Athens, around the 5th century before Christ. A girl about 14 years old stands in the public market. A man looks at her the way someone today might look at an animal before buying it. He checks her teeth. He checks her hands. He asks where she came from, the way you might ask about a used car. Nobody around them thinks this is strange. To them, she is not a person. She is a product. By the end of the day, she will belong to a family she has never met, in a city where she may not even speak the language well. Her body will not belong to her again for the rest of her life. First, let's clear up a common myth. Many people today picture ancient Greece as a place where some women, called heterai, lived free and glamorous lives. These women were educated, clever, and spent time with powerful men. The most famous example is Aspasia, the partner of a famous Athenian leader named Pericles. People often use her story to say, see, women had good chances back then. But this idea is only a small, rare piece of the real picture. For every woman like Aspasia, there were thousands of women and girls who lived a completely different life. A life of ownership, a life with no rights, a life where nobody asked what they wanted, ever. This video is about what that life really looked like and how an entire famous civilization was built partly on top of it. In ancient Greece, women connected to sex work fell into roughly 3 groups. At the top were the heterai. These were often foreign-born women trained in music, poetry, and conversation. They spent time with rich and powerful men, sometimes for years. Some could even own property and make their own choices about money and relationships. This made them very different from most Greek wives, who actually had fewer freedoms in daily life. In the middle, and this was the largest group by far, were enslaved women owned directly by families. Their bodies were simply seen as something the male head of the house could use. No agreement was needed. No permission was needed. At the bottom were the pornai, women who worked in brothels. Many of them were enslaved outright. A brothel owner decided their hours, their price, and their conditions completely. Greek law made this system very clear. A free Athenian woman who did sex work lost much of her legal respect in society, but an enslaved woman had no legal respect to lose in the first place because she never had any. Her feelings, her consent, none of that mattered under the law. This is the key fact that the glamorous hetera story hides. For almost all women in the system, there was no ladder to climb. There was only ownership. The only real difference between groups was simply how hard daily life would be, never whether they were free. Slavery in ancient Greece was not seen as shameful or wrong by the people living there. It was just a normal part of daily life, the same way roads or markets were normal. Historians believe that around 1 in 4, maybe even 1 in 3, people living in Athens at the time were enslaved. Women captured during wars or bought through trade were treated as a type of property, valued both for work and for sexual use, often both at the same time. Think about how business like this became. A brothel owner would calculate a woman's value almost like a shop owner tracks stock. How many customers per night? How long she would remain useful? Whether it was cheaper to care for her if she got sick, or cheaper to simply replace her with someone else. A well-known Greek speaker named Aeschines even talked about brothel business details in a courtroom speech, the same casual way someone today might mention rent prices. That is the real horror hiding under the myth. This was not secret. It was not shocking to people at the time. It was just normal, everyday business, written down next to notes about grain prices and shipping costs. Prices for enslaved people even changed like prices for any other goods. During wars, many captives entered the market at once, so prices dropped, and often treatment got worse because there were simply more people to replace someone who died or became sick. During peaceful times, prices could rise and sometimes treatment slightly improved, but only because losing a person now cost more money. This had nothing to do with kindness. It was cold math, the same math used on cattle, but used on human beings. To really understand daily life for these women, picture the symposium. This was a private drinking party for rich, powerful men in ancient Athens. Today, people often celebrate it as the birthplace of deep philosophy, wine, wit, and famous conversations, even the kind written down by the philosopher Plato. Enslaved women were a normal part of these parties. Some played music, some danced, some served wine, and some were expected to be sexually available once the serious conversation ended. Ancient paintings on vases from this time show these parties clearly, men reclining and talking, and in the same picture, enslaved women shown in sexual scenes right next to the respectable image of male thinkers debating big ideas. Now imagine that room from her side. She is pouring wine for men who are seriously discussing the meaning of justice and the perfect society, but she already knows the answer to their question does not include her. She has no vote in what happens to her later that night. She has no vote in anything, ever, in her whole life. These men were not exactly hypocrites, not by their own way of thinking, because their entire idea of justice was built only around free male citizens from the very beginning. She simply was never part of the picture they were imagining. The philosophy never stopped to ask why. This is where the glamorous hetera story falls apart completely. Even women in that small, higher status group had almost no legal protection if something went wrong. A wealthy man could simply break a promise or agreement with a hetera, and there was little she could do because the legal system was never built to properly listen to her side. And remember, this higher group was tiny. Aspasia is famous exactly because she was so unusual that men chose to write about her. Historians have almost no personal stories about the countless enslaved women working near the ports because ancient writers simply did not think their lives were worth recording. That silence itself tells us how little their lives were valued. For enslaved women specifically, there was no escape through cleverness or charm, the way old stories about heterae like to suggest. Freedom, called manumission, did happen sometimes, but it was completely up to the owner. It rarely happened for women who were specifically valued for sexual labor because her value depended entirely on her staying exactly where she was. And even freed women rarely gained full citizen rights or true equality. Freedom in ancient Athens had many levels, and even a freed woman usually stayed near the very bottom for the rest of her life. This was not a system with steps you could climb. It was a system with one single locked door, and it only opened from the outside, only when someone else decided it should, usually for reasons that had nothing to do with her well-being at all. It's important to know something people often assume wrongly. Ancient Greece was not one single culture with one single set of rules. Sparta, a city known for extreme military discipline, treated enslaved people even more harshly in some ways. Sparta's enslaved population was called the Helots. Each year, Spartan leaders would formally declare war on their own Helots. This bizarre law meant any Spartan citizen could kill a Helot without facing any punishment. Sexual abuse of Helot women happened inside this larger climate of complete powerlessness. And unlike in Athens, Helots were not owned by one single family. They were owned by the entire state, which meant there was even less personal reason for anyone to treat them decently. Compare this to Corinth, a busy trading city famous across the ancient world for large-scale sex work, both religious and commercial. Or think about the later Hellenistic kingdoms that formed after Alexander the Great's conquests, where the idea of the wealthy, powerful hetera reached its peak. Women like Thais and later Phryne became genuinely rich and influential during this era. This variety across the Greek world matters because it destroys the idea of one single, uniquely advanced ancient Greek approach to any of this. What stayed the same everywhere, in Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and beyond, was one basic legal fact. Being enslaved meant having zero control over your own body. Every city just added its own local flavor on top of that same core truth. The twist here is the part that should really make you stop and think. This whole system was not some small, embarrassing flaw sitting quietly beside Athenian democracy. It was underneath it, holding it up the same way a foundation holds up a house while nobody upstairs ever thinks to look down. Athens, the city famous for inventing citizen self-government, built that entire system mostly on the backs of people who were never even considered full humans under the law. Enslaved women sat at the very sharpest edge of that unfairness, doing double duty as both workers and sexual property, with zero legal identity attached to either role. The famous Greek symposium, remembered today as the birthplace of great philosophy, regularly included enslaved women as entertainment and sexual objects, present in the room, but almost completely erased from history, except for what we can still piece together today from old paintings and old courtroom speeches.